Okay, we're ready.
Welcome to our whirlwind tour through the apocalypse given to John on Patmos. The apocalypse of Jesus Christ. And of course, apocalypse means
The unveiling.
And so what we have in this book is the story of the unveiling of Jesus Christ in this creation. From before the foundation of the world to the beginning of a new heaven and a new earth. Using the example of the chosen holy people of God, the nation of Israel, and those also who bear the testimony of Jesus Christ, the other children of the woman. Remember from the 12th chapter, woman clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet, the crown of 12 stars on her head as she gives birth. Is the story, obviously, of the Messiah. And the dragon waits at her feet to devour the child. And then he begins to, when the child is taken up to heaven, he begins to pursue the children of the woman. And they're protected, and he pursues the other children of the woman, the righteous Israel, those who bear the testimony of Jesus Christ. And so now we get to, so the 12th chapter is the story of the incarnation, the rebellion in heaven, where Satan and his angels are cast down to earth. It's the story of the beginnings of the persecution of the church. And out of this time, immediately after the ascension of Christ, it begins to unfold a story for the time between the ascension of Christ and the desolation, the punishment of the land of Israel. Now it tells some very specific things about this story in apocalyptic language. It also tells some general things about this time. But I think it would do us good to begin to discuss and explore and be a little more free and open with questions to describe this time, because this time is described by Jesus in the 21st chapter of Luke. It's described by Jesus in the 24th chapter of Matthew. Jesus alludes to these events, some of these events, when he tells the high priest, when the high priest says, "Tell us, are you," King James Version says, "I adjure you by the living God," which obligates you to give an answer. Because up to this time, Jesus had been silent, facing his accusers. He says, "Are you the Messiah? Are you the Son of God?" So Jesus, being forced to give an answer, says, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of glory." So this is something he tells the high priest of Israel that he's standing in front of. This is something you're going to see with your eyes. You will see that event with your eyes. And certainly we see the story leading up to, at the end of the 14th chapter, as we'll read tonight, the events of the Son of Man coming in the clouds in judgment with a sickle in his hand, followed by another angel with a sickle in his hand. And what results from this harvest of the earth is the complete destruction of the land of Israel and the diaspora, and Jews being prohibited from Jerusalem and from Judea, and the Roman emperor plowing the ground that Jerusalem had stood upon. And where the temple had stood particularly was plowed so that you couldn't tell anything had ever been there, and in fulfillment of what Jesus says in Luke 21 and Matthew 24. Now, I don't think that everybody keeps the words of Luke 21 and Matthew 24 on the front of your brain. So we're going to read those things tonight, because this tells the story of the end, the last week, and the consequences of the last week of the 70 weeks of the prophecy in the 9th chapter of Daniel. This will be the story where it says, and desolations are decreed until the end. This is the punishment that would befall the people of Israel at the end of the 490 years allotted to them in that prophecy in the 9th chapter of Daniel. And it will fulfill those things Jesus says in Luke 21 and Matthew 24. So why don't we go to Luke 21? That's the more concise of the two accounts. We'll go to the 21st chapter of Luke. And I'm going to let the narrator here begin at the first verse, and we'll hear the story of the widow's mite, but it's only a couple of verses, and pick up with Jesus' remarks on the destruction of the temple and the punishment of the nation that would reject him.
Luke 21. As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. Some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. And Jesus said, as for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down. Teacher, they asked, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to take place? He replied, watch out that you are not deceived. For many will come in my name, claiming, I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison. And you will be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. And so you will bear testimony to me. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. Stand firm, and you will win life. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment in fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land, and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword, and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near.
So here we have the Lucene account, Luke's witness of the words of Jesus. And he describes a time, and the sort of strange type of dispensationalism that the evangelical church in America has taught over the years doesn't really explain these words very well. It says, oh, well, that's at the end yet to come. Well, remember, Daniel was addressing the end time that follows the ascension of Jesus. And we remember we've had the end time of the flood, the end time that this speaks of is the end time of the nation of Israel, who would then not inhabit the land of their promise for another 2,000 years. And so this 13th and 14th chapter of Revelation is speaking of that period of time between Jesus' ascension and this punishment of Israel that has rejected God's Messiah. And we in general don't know a great deal about this period of time because we don't have scripture that's written during the period of time that many of these major things begin to take place. The time after the ascension of Jesus, those days become very, very dark and very, very evil. When Jesus says, I've come to set brother against brother, son against father, daughter against mother-in-law, and really very concisely describes that period of time. It's a time that's filled with just absolute hate for your fellow man in the land of Israel. Violent crimes increase to the point that the Sanhedrin, the top court of the land, stops even prosecuting capital crimes. There's so much murder, there's so much capital crime that they just stop trying it. They stop holding court on it. There are roving bands of Jewish bandits everywhere that take their fellow Jews and kill them and take their stuff. There are a strange variety of religious zealots that become essentially random assassins. They think everybody else is not taking the messianic hope seriously enough, so they just get into a crowded marketplace and start stabbing people. It's characterized by hate between brothers and between citizens. That's just absolutely unprecedented. It speaks of wars and rumors of wars. The world during this period of time, it's not just Judea that is set upon by war. It's the entire known world. The Parthians and the Romans, the two great powers, the Parthians in Asia and Rome in Africa and parts of the Middle East and all of Europe and that sort of thing, are at war. It's a world war going on at the time. The Jews begin to rebel all over the world. We'll see that there's a revolt in Judea that brings the Roman general Vespasian down to quell the rebellion very violently. And he's called back to Rome when Nero commits suicide, and he ends up becoming Caesar. And his son Titus carries on the campaign and ends up finally quelling the rebellion and completely destroying Jerusalem and its temple in 70 AD. Then you have rebellion all over the known world, wherever Jews live, something called the Kitos War. You remember we went over the Roman, it gets its name, you'll see it, if you look it up, you'll look up something called, that's spelled K-I-T-O-S, the Kitos War. But it's actually named after the Roman general that was sent by Caesar to quell the rebellion that was largely in North Africa and the island of Cyprus and a few other regions in Asia Minor. And the Jews all revolted and they were killing Gentiles and then the Roman general Kitus, Q-U-I-E-T-U-S, was sent to suppress that rebellion, which he did very violently and efficiently. And so that's the expression I'd heard all my life, and it was a long time before I figured out where the expression came from. My dad says, I'm going to put the quietus on you. He's talking about the Roman general Caius, which becomes Hellenized into Kitos. So if you want to look it up, You can look up the Kaitos War, just look on Wikipedia. It's got a pretty good explanation of it. And then there are wars, like the prophecy in Daniel says, wars are decreed until the end. And so there's constant war, and it's war all over the world, and particularly in Judea, there's war until finally we have the Bar Kokhba rebellion. The individual beast, the image of the beast perhaps, and his false prophet, Rabbi Akiva, who flesh out that story of the beast from the sea and the beast from the land, the beast and his false prophet. But it's a larger story there as well. Because what also emerges after the ascension of Christ, after his crucifixion, his resurrection, and his ascension, is a system. It's a political and economic and social system that begins to ingrain itself after the image of all of the nations that had held the Jews captive over the years, over the millennium. It has the beast has all 7 heads of the 4 beasts in the prophecy of the 7th chapter of Daniel. You have 4 beasts there, and one of them has 3 heads for a total of 7 heads. One of the beasts that represents one of the heads is killed and its body burned. But it shows up in the 7-headed beast as the one head that had been wounded but yet lives. And so this is the grotesque chimera. A chimera is a mythological animal, especially in Greek mythology, that had features of different animals. The head of an eagle and the body of a lion, and just pieces and parts of different animals put together. It has a modern scientific meaning, which we won't go into, but the chimera is the mythical animal that's really a combination of animals, and that's what this beast with 7 heads is. It's a chimera made up of the pieces and parts of the beasts that represented Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, the nations that had held Israel captive, the Jews captive. And so we see this system that is very, it's taken culturally. I think of it as perhaps the religion of Babylon, the bureaucratic organization of Persia, the culture of Greece, and the military might of Rome. So it has all these features, but instead of looking like an animal that would be in the image of its creator, the Lamb of God, instead it resembles the dragon from the red dragon from the 12th chapter. Before that, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and etc. So this nation that is God's people, God's chosen people, now begins to resemble something really very grotesque. And it's a political and economic system that we'll see survives all this to reappear later in our story, when it's being ridden by the whore of Babylon. And so when we get there, this beast will reemerge, this beast that at one point John said was, is not, but will be. So this period of time here, Judea becomes something really very evil and something very grotesque. And we also see emerge the decline of the temple cult, and the worship in the temple, and the temple's destruction, utter destruction in AD 70. And we see it replaced from chaos that represents the political and economic system, that Israel becomes something very in the image of the dragon. And we see the beast that emerges from the land that has 2 horns like a lamb. but it speaks like the dragon. And it causes the whole world to worship the first beast. This grotesque chimera that's replaced now the temple system that God ordained. And the law of God is now replaced by the traditions of men. You know, that was Jesus' criticism of the Pharisees, that you substitute the traditions of men for the laws of God. And so we have the system and its false witness, but we see it in a more specific way at the end of the story, before the final desolation of the land and the final punishment. And it's the story of Bar Kokhba and his rebellion. And we went into a lot of that. We'll go into it again, but I want to kind of tie it off to unify it a little bit before we get into the specifics again. So if we go back to Revelation, we're going to read the 13th and 14th chapters together in one. I'm going to let the narrator here read it in one reading, because they belong together. Because we're going to see how the story emerges about the social, governmental, and economic system that emerges after Christ's ascension. And we're going to see the rise of rabbinical Judaism that creates the specific beast of Bar Kokhba and his false prophet, Rabbi Akiva, which to this day is probably the defining moment in even modern Judaism. Because Rabbi Akiva is the one who sets up the religion of the Jews that exists to this day. And Bar Kokhba is still, those events in one way or another are still remembered or even celebrated in the art of Jerusalem and in the history and the festivals of modern Judaism. And so it's really a very important story, and it's central to the last times that we're coming upon. Until we understand the last time, we really won't have our story complete, understand what to expect with the next last time that I believe is upon us soon. How soon, I don't know, but soon. So we want to understand these things. So this story begins with these beasts emerging from the sea, and this part of the story ends. Fall off. That's what the crackling was.
Oh.
Not a very stable system I've got going here. I'll have to wear a different shirt next time. So the story begins with the beast emerging from the sea and the beast emerging from the land and the dragon empowering them. And this part of the story ends when the Son of Man comes in the clouds with a sickle in his hand. And then he's followed by an angel with a sickle in his hand for a second harvest. And the grapes are placed in the great winepress of God's wrath, and the blood flows to the horse's bridle. And remember, that's one of our time stamps to let us know, because the Jerusalem Talmud and the proceedings of Sanhedrin actually say that the blood flowed to the horse's nostrils, and the nostrils and the bridle are the same level. And I would actually read you those passages out of the Jerusalem Talmud and the proceedings of Sanhedrin. So, if we go to Revelation 13, I'm going to let the narrator read this and see if you can imagine it telling the story of the type of world that I described here earlier. See if you can imagine this describing this type of world. And see if you can see in it the fulfillment of what we heard Jesus tell his disciples about the temple and the judgment of this people that was foretold in Luke 21.
Revelation 13. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads. blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed.
Remember, these are all the
The whole
features
world
from
was
Daniel
filled with
7.
wonder and followed the beast.
Features of the four
People
nations from
worshipped
Daniel
the
7.
dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, "Who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it?" The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42
Do your
months.
right, what you saying?
It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they would not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. Revelation 14. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. Then I saw another angel flying in mid-air, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." A second angel followed and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries." A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb, and the smoke of from their torment will rise forever and ever. There will be no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write this: Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles, for a distance of 1,600 stadia. Brother.
So here, we have, in apocalyptic language, we have this story of the two great harvests that are not joyful raptures like we anticipate the rapture of the church. These were terrible, terrible times of judgment upon a people who had rejected their Messiah, as Jesus foretold, as Daniel foretold, and as Jesus foretells in Luke 21 and Matthew 24. And as Jesus tells Caiaphas, the high priest, the night of his trial, looking him in the eyes. And the first harvest is the Roman suppression of what's called the first Jewish revolt, the fall of Jerusalem. Now, the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius writes, 400 pages on these events. There are 200 pages just on the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And I have read it, 6 or 7 times. And I'm telling you, if you were to read those words of history given by this, and he says at the beginning of his writing, and this particular set of volumes is called The Wars of the Jews. And he says, I'm telling the story, he said, because a lot of people have told it from a Roman perspective. And they do it, and they tell it the way they tell it because they hate the Jews. He said, but I am one. He said, and that is not my purpose. He said, I'm going to tell you the truth about my own people. And the picture that Josephus paints in that account, I'm getting chill bumps right now. If it doesn't move you to tears, you're not reading the same thing I read. It tells of the Romans bringing 10 legions down and laying siege to the city of Jerusalem, but largely watching the people of Jerusalem kill each other. Jerusalem divides into 3 factions that war against each other. So one faction holds the Temple Mount, one the southern part of the city, the other northern part of the city, and they raid each other. They burn each other's food supplies. Here are the Romans outside And the people inside are burning each other's food stores. At one point, there's, these zealots I was telling you about that would hide their daggers under their cloaks and go into the marketplace and then stab people. Now, they are homosexual transvestite. I'm not making this up. I read this in Josephus, and you can go read it for yourself too. There's this band of violent, transsexual, transvestite, homosexual zealots that dress up like women and priss around, and then when they get into a place, out from under their woman's clothing comes the dagger, and they kill whoever they can get to. And they have homosexual orgies in the streets of Jerusalem, openly. This is the kind of madness that the city has descended into, the kind of hatred. Everybody hates everybody. And you have bloodshed at the hands of your brother. Not the Romans outside. Now, they're doing plenty of terrible stuff too. People were trying to sneak out of Jerusalem and take a little something with them. They would swallow the gold coins, and they would get out, and the Roman soldiers discovered one of them. And when they disemboweled him, gold coins came out, so they started disemboweling everybody that came out looking for gold coins. I mean, Josephus has the account of an aristocratic woman who kills and eats her own baby and eats half of it. And then if anybody smelled food cooking in the city, because they were reduced to boiling grass and eating leather and that kind of thing, because the Romans had cut off their supplies and they had burned each other's. They smelled something cooking, and they go in and there's half a baby. Half it eaten and the other half, and the woman said, share my meal. And so these are the types of distress that was in those days. And when Jesus says, a day of distress like this has never occurred since the world began, in Matthew 24, he says, nor will it ever be that way again. So the bloodshed starts in 66 AD with the Jewish revolt. Vespasian and his son Titus subdue Jerusalem, destroy Jerusalem and its temple. Josephus actually has the emperor's son, the general Titus, standing outside the walls of Jerusalem saying, look, I respect your God and his temple. Why are you destroying it? I don't want to destroy it. I respect your God and his temple. But you're the ones that are destroying it. Now, some Jewish historians now and some rabbis are very critical of Josephus. They're saying, well, he's really telling it from the Roman perspective. But in the preface of this book, he says very pointedly, no, I'm telling you the truth. Now, it says, if we go back to the 13th chapter, and if we go back to Luke and Matthew, it talks about great signs in the heavens. Josephus records, he said, if I were just telling this, if I were just making this up, I would lose all credibility. He said, because it's so fantastical. He said, but I've heard it now from too many eyewitnesses to discount it. He says, they saw warriors, giant warriors in the sky in pitched battle. There was for months before the siege of Jerusalem, there was a comet in the shape of a sickle in the sky, a sickle-shaped sword in the sky. And it turns out it's the time for Halley's Comet, but it formed the shape of a sword. It was taken as an omen. And there were other signs in the heavens that Josephus describes. So it's this period of time begins to conform very specifically to the words of Jesus and to the Old Testament prophets. And this is telling that story. So this time in 70 AD, it was so spectacularly fulfilling of prophecy, that's even led people that have a perspective on prophecy called total preterism. A preterist believes that all biblical prophecy has already been fulfilled and that there's none left to be fulfilled. All what the Bible prophesied has already been done. That's total preterist. Now, some people are partial preterists, like I would fall into that category, because I'm saying that many of these things up till now that we've studied in Revelation have already taken place. It describes events that are in our past. Now, these events are in John's future. Because writing this in the early 60s AD, he says, I'm writing about things that must soon take place. He's writing this, he has this vision and writes it down in around 62, 63 AD, and he sees these things that are going to happen in 70 AD. 7 or 8 short years. And then he sees these things that are going to happen in 135, which is still soon in a historical context, but these things begin very, very quickly. And so this is the end time spoken of by Daniel. When he refers to the end time, this is the end time he's talking about. When Jesus refers to the end of the age, not the end of the world, but the end of the age of temple worship and the beginning of the time of the Gentiles. When he says that the Gentiles will trample Jerusalem until such a time as it's no longer the time of the Gentiles and there's the end of this next end time, the one that I believe that we face. Maybe not us specifically, but someone, either us or someone pretty, not too terribly far removed from us. And so, the story of the beast from the sea and the beast from the land sets in motion something that we're going to see is in motion again today. So this is just because this describes the events between the ascension of Christ and the total desolation of the land of Judah, doesn't mean it's not germane to us. Because here now it begins to set a paradigm, a pattern that we will see reemerge in part of this prophecy that I think affects our time. Now, I want to remind us about a few of the features of this story and some things that we brought up before. So it says in describing the beast out of the sea, remember the prophecy of Daniel? The nation of Greece was represented as a leopard, Medo-Persia as a bear, Babylon as a lioness, and then Rome as this strange, fearful being. And we have some writings in a book called Second Esdras in the Apocrypha that describes that as an eagle, but otherwise, that's the beast that has the deadly wound, it's killed and its body burned, but now it reappears as this conglomeration of all those nations from Daniel 7. And it had those specific. And then it says, who is like the beast, who can wage war against it? The system that is emerging out of Israel at this time, we think of Israel as this tiny, it is a tiny little nation. And Judah of this time was a tiny little thing, but there were Jews all over the world. He said, he gave him authority to tax Jews all over the world. This tiny little speck had the ability to tax them. And they recruited soldiers from all over the world. And by the time Bar Kokhba raises his army in around 132 AD, he's got an army that's considerably larger than the Roman army. It says, who can wage war against him? The General Hadrian and Emperor Hadrian said when they finally bring him, he doesn't believe they've killed Bar Kokhba. He doesn't believe he can be killed. He doesn't believe he can be conquered. And so when they bring him his body, one account says it had a snake wrapped around the neck of the body of Bar Kokhba. And Hadrian says, well, that explains it. He said, because he could not have been killed except his God killed him. And let's go, while I'm on that subject, let's go to Zechariah 12th chapter from Testament, the prophecy of Zechariah. Put on some eyeballs here. And let's read a little bit about this, because when Jesus says, you know, they're not receiving me, and I come in my Father's name, he said, but another will come in his own name, he will receive. They will receive. And Zechariah tells this story about the good shepherd and the false shepherd. I guess we need to start in the 11th. 11th chapter, 4th verse. And I'm going to read it because I don't want the narrator to have to read the whole chapter. It says, this is what the Lord my God says. Shepherd the flock marked for slaughter. And it's this nation that will reject its Messiah. That's the flock marked for slaughter. So their buyers slaughter them and go unpunished. Those who sell them say, praise the Lord, I'm rich. Their own shepherds do not spare them. For I'll no longer have pity on the people of the land, declares the Lord. I will give everyone into the hands of their neighbors and their king. They will devastate the land, and I will not rescue anyone from their hands. Describe these days that we're talking about. So I shepherded the flock marked for slaughter, particularly the oppressed of the flock. Then I took 2 staffs, one called Favor and the other Union, and I shepherded the flock. In 1 month, I got rid of the 3 shepherds. The flock detested me, and I grew weary of them. And I said, I will not be your shepherd. Let the dying die. Let the perishing perish. Let those who are left eat one another's flesh. To him, to the sword, to him, to captivity, to captivity. You remember that's a quote from Ezekiel when he says, even if Samuel and Moses were standing right in front of me pleading their case, I would not change my mind. I am going to destroy them. Then I took my staff called Favor and broke it, revoking the covenant I had made with all the nations. It was revoked on that day, and so the oppressed of the flock who were watching me knew it was the word of the Lord. I told them, if you think it best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they valued me. That's sarcasm, by the way. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them to the potter at the house of the Lord. Then I broke my second staff called Union, breaking the family bond between Judah and Israel. Then the Lord said to me, take again the equipment of a foolish shepherd, for I'm going to raise up a shepherd over the land who will not care for the lost or seek the young or heal the injured or feed the healthy, but will eat the meat of the choice sheep, tearing off their hooves. Woe to the worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm be completely withered and his right eye totally blinded. Bar Kokhba was extremely cruel man. He tortured Christians in ways that Nero never even thought about. And he killed everyone that would not oppose the Roman rule with him. And when Rabbi Akiva stood him in the ruins of the temple, at the place that had been the Holy of Holies, and anointed him Messiah, Christians remembered what Jesus said. When you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, as spoken of by the prophet Daniel, leave. And they got out of town. Just like they did back in 70 AD when he said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, leave. And they did at that time too. And so he caused all of his soldiers to cut off the little tip of their little finger on their right hand, take a mark in their right hand to show their allegiance to him. And so it said, I told again in the Jerusalem Talmud, it says that at the time that Bar Kokhba was killed, he had slain the last righteous rabbi, his own uncle. And they said a voice from heaven spoke and said, may your right eye be blind and your right arm withered. Just before Bar Kokhba met his end at Betar. And when it says that the wine press is outside the gates of the city, Betar was outside the gates of what had been Jerusalem. So that wine press is from where, when at the massacre at Betar, when Bar Kokhba finally fell, there was so much bloodshed that the writer said that the blood flowed to the horse's nostrils. So this is a defining moment that, unless we really understand the significance of this period, this short period of history, and the harvest that took place, and the type of wrath and the degree of the wrath that was poured out by God on the nation that rejected his son. This was Jesus who had come, I come but for the lost sheep of Israel, because they're the ones that needed his mercy. The ones that accepted his mercy are described as the 144,000 that remained pure. And I think, as best I could, as we talked about with the other 144,000 from each of the tribes of Israel, except for Dan, this 144,000 is a number that, it's a limited number, it's a relatively small number, but it's a number that represents something that's hugely important to God. It's a number that denotes something very precious to him. And so then we see that these 144,000 that I take to be martyrs during the time, this period of time that we're speaking of, are sealed, and they're in the presence, and they're singing a new song, and then the wrath of God is meted out on the people at whose hands they died. And it's really a very, very, very fascinating, a very sad, a sickening time. Bar Kokhba took coins from whatever realm and restamped them. And he put on it a picture of the temple that had been, and he was promising that as Messiah, and he touted himself as Messiah. He said, as Messiah, I'm going to conquer the Romans, free our nation, and rebuild the temple. And his symbol was a star. After all, they were calling him son of a star, Bar Kokhba. His name had been Bar Kokhba. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, we're going to call you Bar Kokhba because of Balaam's prophecy that out of Jacob would come a star. He says, back in Exodus, he says, I see him, but not now. And it's clearly a messianic prophecy by Balaam. But he took on this, and he takes on the image, the star, and the number of his name. Now, we earlier, way back, if you remember, we looked at Solomon as the original Antichrist. And how that Solomon, it said that he took in 666 talents of gold in revenue and taxes from his tiny nation. And that he had a throne with 6 lines, 6 steps, and 6 lines. And we saw that Solomon also had a symbol, and it was a star. And it's the same star that flies on the flag of Israel today, only they call it the Shield of David. They don't associate it with Solomon, but every other culture and secret society and mystery religion on earth equates that six-pointed star with Solomon. And Bar Kokhba put the star above the temple to represent himself on those coins. And it's really very interesting. I can show you pictures, and I may do that one night on the screen, that many of these, there are a lot of these coins around, and people collect them, and these Bar Kokhba images or coins. And most of the pictures of them I've seen have the stars rubbed off. Because he became, after his failure as Messiah, they began to call him son of the lie, or Bar Kokhba, instead of Bar Kokhba, son of the lie. And that's what the Christians called him. So the rabbis were a little late with it, because the Christians, instead of calling him Bar Kokhba, they called him Bar Kozba, son of the lie, or the lie. And it's interesting that the gematria for Shema Bar Kokhba in Hebrew, the Hebrew numbers associated with those letters is 666. But there are some texts, there's some Greek texts of Revelation, and instead of saying 666, say 616. And 616 is the gematria for Shema Bar Kozba. So the Christians had called him son of the lie. And some of the copiers of the manuscript wouldn't put 666 because that stood for son of the star. They put son of a lie, 616. It's very interesting that those two gematria actually show up in the Christian manuscripts of the Christian texts of the book of Revelation. And that explains why some say 666 and some say 616. So I think we're out of time tonight. Please think up questions, and we'll let the audience at home go. And I'll stick around a little bit, and we'll have a question Q&A. That's a lot to buy everybody.